Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarah Jennings. I'm the Regional Vice President for the Central Region here at AARP, and I'm talking to you today from beautiful Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I hope everybody is having a wonderful afternoon or morning, whatever time it is where you are at, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We have a great lineup of guests, and we're going to be talking about the impact of the midterm elections and kind of the opportunities and challenges ahead for our social mission priorities on behalf of the 50-plus as we look to 2019 and beyond. So as I mentioned, we have a great lineup with us today to give their insights and reactions and predictions for our activity in the coming months. And first we have Nancy LeaMond, who most of you would already know. She is our Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer for our Community, State, and National Affairs team. And it's one of the longer titles, but it's because she's so important and impactful. Nancy oversees all of AARP's government affairs campaigns, programs, multicultural, and community engagement teams, including all of the state offices and the Office of Volunteer Engagement. Nancy is a nationally recognized leader on health, retirement security, and other issues important to older Americans, and her career spans nearly 40 years in the government and nonprofit sectors, and immediately prior to coming to AARP, she served as the Chief of Staff and Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for the Congressional Affairs at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. So, Nancy, we are thrilled you're with us this afternoon, and we will get to hear some insights from you in a moment, but thanks for being with us, Nancy. And then we also have David Certner, who is AARP's Senior Legislative Counsel and Legislative Policy Director for our Government Affairs Department. David has been with AARP since 1982 and has testified numerous times before both Congress and regulatory bodies. He's often interviewed on TV and radio, and he has a very active Twitter feed. So for those of you on Twitter, if you don't follow David, I highly recommend you find him, and we'll have him share. David, what's your Twitter handle? So that
at Certner.
At D. Certner or David Certner? David Certner. So folks who are on Twitter, follow David. And then finally, we have Khelan Bhatia with us, who David hasn't beat, but Khelan has been with AARP for 17 years. And Khelan has been on this call previously, if you happen to join that, where he managed the Be the Difference vote campaign this year. And so he's going to have lots of insider information about the impact of our efforts so far that we know of already after the election on Tuesday. We're going to use this call today to look at initial impressions about the impact of the election on our work, how AARP will move forward through the balance of the year, and what we can expect in 2019 with a new Congress and new state legislatures and many new governors across the country. Throughout the call, we especially want to hear from all of you, our volunteers, about the observations from the elections. You know, we'd love to hear who turned out in your community and what were the key issues being talked about with your neighbors. So please, we'd like to make these as interactive as possible. So press *3 at any time to ask one of our panelists a question or to just make a comment to share what Election Day was like where you were at. Again, press *3 at any time, and you can get into the queue to make a comment or ask a question. So without further ado, Nancy, what struck you the most from Tuesday's election?
Well, thank you. Thanks to Sarah, and thanks to all of you for calling in. What struck me the most is we finished our exciting and long election season, and one where I think we saw something we expected from the beginning, which was that older voters played a significant role. That's important for our constituency, and it's important for us. The 50-plus turned out in big numbers on Election Day and before, with national exit polls showing that older Americans made up 56% of the electorate. Nationally, older voters, both the 50 to 64-year-olds and 65-plus, narrowly favored Republican House candidates by 1 point, 50 to 49. Though, of course, remember that margin can vary widely when you look at the individual races. Still, that number tells us a lot. It represents a dramatic erosion in support for Republican candidates among the 50-plus compared to the last midterm cycle in 2014, and significantly contributed to the headline of the week, that is, Democrats taking majority control of the House of Representatives. The 50-plus were also decisive in most of the Senate races. In 3 Senate seats that changed from Democratic to Republican, older voters favored the winner by large margins, and the 50-plus chose winners in a host of other states. Looking at exit poll data, and we're going to have more refined numbers in the coming days and weeks, Nevada is the one Senate race where older voters did not support the winning candidate. The election also had big implications at the state level, with Republicans winning a number of marquee governor's races and Democrats flipping another 7, as well as 5 legislative chambers. And I'm happy to report that we were also successful on a number of important ballot initiatives that the AARP state teams, including many of you, were involved in. That was Medicaid expansion passed in Nebraska and Utah, a bond measure and constitutional amendment related to funding affordable housing passed in Oregon, a Nevada constitutional amendment that would have increased utility costs did not pass, and in Colorado we successfully opposed a proposal that would have reprioritized state spending away from Medicaid. This engagement broadly in ballot initiatives was kind of a new step for us. We had done ballot initiatives before, but never as many as this. We've learned a lot, and we think it's a very powerful way to engage. And I might also mention that really for the first time, we systematically did voter engagement work in a number of mayoral races around the country, and I think you're going to see more of this, especially this coming year when there are going to be some important cities deciding who is governing them. We're going to be taking a closer look in the weeks ahead of all the available data about how and why folks voted the way they did, and we're already focused on what the election means for our advocacy agenda. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. Hope springs eternal for bipartisan cooperation in Washington, but divided government can also mean even more gridlock. And there will be many more opportunities in the states for things like Medicaid expansions. My colleagues are going to talk more about that, and before I turn it over to them, I want to again thank all of you for your hard work this year on our Be the Difference Vote campaign, and on our state and local advocacy, and everything else you do to help us fight for and equip older Americans to live their best lives. It's absolutely true. We know this to our core. We would not be successful without our volunteers across the country, and we are deeply appreciative of all you invest in AARP and our agenda.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for that last sentiment, Nancy. It's so true. And again, I know Nancy and David and Khelan would love to hear from all of you across the country about what you observed on Election Day, or any insights or intel you have had since Election Day about maybe an outcome that surprised folks in your community or state. So please press *3 at any time to share a comment, or if you have a question, if some of Nancy's comments sparked a question, she's ready for those questions too. So press *3 at any time. Khelan, so at this stage, what do we know about turnout and the impact of our effort, which we call Be the Difference Vote?
Great question, Sarah, and thanks again for having me on the call. Just to add to what Nancy said, this was a high turnout midterm. If you look at the last 2 midterms, 2010 had about 91 million ballots cast. In 2014, the last midterm, it was about 83 million, which was the lowest midterm since, I want to say, 1946, maybe. This year was 114 million. These are close to presidential numbers. People were engaged both sides of the aisle. We know that 56% of the electorate was 50 plus, and as Nancy mentioned, for the House vote especially, it was split between Democrats and Republicans. We're still waiting on the full data to see what the impact of the 50 plus were on specific races, but we know through Be the Difference Vote that we were instrumental in getting AARP members who don't normally come out in midterm years to go vote. It was all the work that you did out in the states and in your communities. It was the work that we did together by reminding them about how important this election is, what issues were online, including Medicare, Social Security, prescription drug affordability, Medicaid, family caregiving, and the litany of state issues that we focused on in the governor's races. We sent 10 million pieces of mail. We made 4 million phone calls to the these drop-off voters that are AARP members. We did it in multicultural communities, African American and Black communities, Hispanic, Latino communities, Asian American, Pacific Islander communities, and reaching out to 50 plus or LGBTQ. And we made a tremendous impact in this partisan and polarized environment. Think about how toxic our politics have become. And AARP was an organization that was able to convene candidates from both sides of the aisle to talk about the issues that matter to our members. We did 19 video voters guides in governor's races. That's huge. We had over 55 teletown halls with candidates on both the federal level and the state level, talking about our issues, and they weren't attacking each other on those. We all saw those attack ads, but in the ways that we convened the candidates, they were sticking to the issues. I think that's really important, and I think that makes a huge impact for our advocacy work moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great point, Khelan. Thanks for that. And we are going to go to the phones. Judy from Kansas had a comment to make, I think sparked by some of your comments, Nancy and Khelan. And then David, we're going to get to you, I promise. But before that, Judy, go ahead and share your comment.
Can you hear me?
I can. Hey there.
Hey, I just wanted to let you know that you probably saw that we got elected a Democratic governor that beat Chris Kobach. And she is very much in support of Medicaid expansion. And we almost got it passed last year, but it was vetoed by the governor. So I feel pretty optimistic that Kansas can get Medicaid expansion.
That's great news. Any reaction to that, Nancy or David, if you have any?
Well, let me just jump in quickly. We, like you, have looked at the map. We have Medicaid expansion came out of the ballot initiatives positively in a number of places, and we fully expect to be working on it in those states. We're waiting to kind of plan with our state directors and state staff and volunteers, but it is, we noted it's a new day in Kansas.
And this is David, and I would just note that the turnover in some of the other governor's races probably means that there will be some Medicaid expansion in some other states as well. But not only will it be expansion, but in some states, some bad Medicaid waivers were put forward that we opposed. And with some of the new Democratic governors coming in, there's a good chance that some of those will be pulled back. So all in all, it was a pretty good week for Medicaid at the ballot box.
That's a great point. And actually, we're going to stick with the phones because Len out, I think in Arizona, had a question about Medicaid. So why don't we stick with on the Medicaid topic and go ahead.
Yeah, Nancy, Len Kirshner. Medicaid is my favorite program, clearly, and it was a great day for Medicaid nationally. Now the question is, what do we do in those states that are still hanging back? Florida, Texas, the large ones, Mississippi, and others. What's the plan of moving forward, moving off what in many ways was one of the finest outcomes of this election, the Medicaid expansions and the changes of governors who have been fighting Medicaid expansion in their states?
Well, hi, Len. How are you?
Good.
You know, as David referenced, we now, we have the benefit of a day since the election, and we'll be sitting down and looking at our Medicaid work across the country, deciding where we need to focus immediately on some of these waivers, where we have other opportunities, and we'll have, I think, a kind of in the great tradition of Nationwide, we'll have a lot of different activities going on across the board. The world of Medicaid has changed. I've been in this world almost as long as you have, and one thing the so-called repeal and replace debate did was make a case for Medicaid that had never been made before. And it was made largely by the rural hospitals, I will tell you, not that the rest of us weren't important. So it is a different climate. We've got to kind of sit down, look across the country, figure out what we're going to do in each place. As David said, each place is going to be a little different.
And I would add, as more and more states that didn't expand Medicaid begin to, I think it's going to leave those that are not expanding, really a lot more isolated. And so I think and I've always believed in the inevitability of this finally getting to every state in the country. It may take a while, but the more states that do it, the more the ones who don't are going to be isolated. And that includes not just on the consumer side, but the providers as well.
Interesting. Great comment. All right, great. And Len, I wanted to, and for folks on the phone who may have been on the call, I think it was just last week when Len shared some of the story of his service and his story of his buddy who he lost over in Vietnam, and we're going to, I know that Studios is going to have a camera to get some of your story on film this weekend, Len. So thank you for doing that for us, and I look forward to seeing that video. And that just shows all the different things that can come out of some of these volunteer teletown halls when we talk and share what we're all up to. So thanks for that, Len. All right, but back to advocacy and looking forward to next year. So David, so what's next and what's possible in Congress through the end of the year, and then we'll maybe talk about next year a little later. But I know the work is not yet done for 2018, is it, David? Maybe talk to us about what's going to happen and what we need folks to do.
Right. So we still have a lame duck session of Congress, which will be obviously there's legislation going on, but there are a lot of other things that are going on in the meantime. For example, there's lots of members who either retired or were defeated and won't be coming back. So you have dozens of members who within a couple of weeks need to clear out of their offices. So that always puts a crimp on people wanting to even be here any longer than they have to. But there are a couple of things that have to get done. One of the first things that's up is going to be leadership elections. The House will be having the Republican elections next week. The Democrats will be following Thanksgiving. There's also the leadership elections in the Senate. The Senate is not likely to change much, but there are elections on the House side and both the Democratic and Republican side that people want to just see who is going to come out as not just the top leaders, because at this point it doesn't look like they may be changing much, but there are lots of other spots that are open or there'll be challenges too, so maybe new faces moving into leadership. Once we get past those elections, we have to get down to some of the business that's due for the end of the year. There's a couple of things still pending that need to get done. One is the potential for a partial government shutdown. I say partial because we've funded a good part of the government, but some parts we have not funded, and that will run out on December 7th. And so we need to get the rest of the government funded by that day, and that will include a potential debate and even potential shutdown possibilities over arguments over the border wall. So we have to get through that and funding the government by December 7th. We also have a farm bill that many of you know that we have been working on, particularly on the nutrition pieces of the farm bill. That has to get done by the end of the year. If nothing gets done, there at least has to be some kind of an extension done by the end of the year, at least punted into next year. So that's another must-do. And as long as we have these vehicles passing, we need to be concerned with potential things that might be stuck on these at the end of the session, particularly by a Republican Party that's losing power and may see this as their last chance to push some things through. We're particularly going to be looking at the issue of the donut hole that we've been talking to everyone about all year. We want to make sure that we maintain the progress that we made earlier in the year on closing the donut hole and shifting some additional costs onto the prescription drug industry. We know the drug industry is pushing hard to try to get that undone by the end of the year, so that's one thing we'll be watching to make sure we don't get any bad amendments added to any of, for example, these budget bills by the end of the year. And, of course, one potential wild card is that there's some litigation pending dealing with some key pieces of the Affordable Care Act, particularly the issues of pre-existing conditions and the age tax. And it's quite possible that the lower court could rule against both of those protections sometime in the next few weeks, in which case I think Congress will immediately want to start taking corrective action to restore those protections. So we'll be looking out for that as well.
Wow, David, that is quite a list. And here I thought we were going to get to kind of cruise into the new year, but I guess not so much. If you have volunteers that are, everyone thinking across the country about what they can do, is there of that list that you just gave us, is there one or two that you think are going to be bubbling first that we should really be focused on, or is it really we won't know until Congress is back? And I guess a second follow-up to that would be, once we are focused on the right issue, what are the actions that you would like volunteers to take to help out the effort that's happening in D.C.?
Sure. Well, the one we've been focused on in particular has been prescription drug costs, and that is an issue not just for the lame duck, but obviously into next year as well. We know the pharmaceutical industry is going to be looking to try to roll back some of the progress that was made this year, but we're obviously going to be looking next year to make more progress on trying to create some legislation to help lower prescription drug prices and help lower the costs of consumers across the country. So that's an issue that we certainly want people to keep reminding legislators about, prescription drug costs as well as healthcare costs in general. And we know from the exit polling and, quite frankly, the advertising that was done this year, the healthcare costs was the single number one issue in the election. There was more advertising run on healthcare cost issue than any other issue. So we know this is top of mind for pre-election, and we want to make sure that the issue of healthcare and prescription drug costs stays top of mind.
Got it. All right. Thank you. And Khelan, well, and I do want to remind folks across the country, you can give a comment or ask a question just by pressing *3. So if any of this is sparking a question, or if you've got an idea of some things we could do to make our case more effectively to our members of Congress in the next couple of months, please press *3 and share your thoughts. But Khelan, shifting a little bit to 2019, what's going to be the post-election areas of focus for the campaigns team? And again, opportunities for volunteers to get involved.
To build on what you said, Sarah, there's really no rest for the weary, because even before we get to 2019, we still have, I would say, about 7 weeks left in 2018. And for that, we're looking kind of at three major components that we want to focus on. One, it's building relationships with the newly elected and re-elected officials on both the state and the federal level, in some cases local level. Number two, it's building AARP's brand with influencers, including those who work in politics, policy, and the media. And then three, most importantly, we want to thank the volunteers on this call. We want to thank volunteers who did so much work during Be the Difference vote, as well as our activists, and just getting them ready for 2019's campaigns. And we're going to have a lot of opportunities, as we talked about, especially on the state level. I know David talked about some of the opportunities on the federal level. But on the state level, we're really going to be able to make some strides on our multi-state campaigns, including helping family caregivers across the country, helping those save for their retirement through their workplaces where they don't have retirement mechanisms right now, helping keep utility rates down. And then as we talked about a little bit before, especially in the case of Kansas as one of the examples, expanding Medicaid when we can and getting rid of some of those bad Medicaid waivers. So we're going to have a lot of work that we're going to be doing. We're doing some from here in the national office. State offices are doing a lot. They're going to be counting on the volunteers to be able to help them, especially with the newly elected and re-elected, and in other cases with some of those influencers that I mentioned before.
Got it. Thanks, Khelan. And we had a question come in before the call regarding Medicaid and some of this, and Medicare and some health care. So I'm going to go ahead and share or pose this question. I think, David, probably for you to start, but if Nancy or Khelan, if either of you have comments. So the first is around Medicaid, and the question says, understanding that more families and children receive Medicaid dollars, however, more Medicaid dollars are spent on care for seniors. The COLA for 2019 is very small while we face an increase in Part B deductible and other deductibles. So then many seniors may face long-term care, and with that, potential cuts to Medicaid, and then also concerns around Medicare. So David, looking ahead, where do you think the battles might be, and where can AARP really get involved to help seniors who may be strapped with all the different costs, and these programs just aren't going to be able to keep up in 2019? What are your thoughts on how we can help address that?
Right. Well, as I said, healthcare costs is clearly a top issue in this election, and it's a top priority, certainly for the new Democratic Congress coming in. The new potential Speaker Pelosi talked about healthcare costs as being a top item. Now that we have divided government, the issue is really going to be, can the two parties work together on issues, and what can they accomplish? With having divided government, it's more likely now that we won't see some of the threats that we've seen to Medicare and Social Security or Medicaid at the legislative level. There's still some potential from the administrative level. There are still regulations coming out that are still problematic that could both increase costs for people as well as reduce access. We'll be continuing to look at those issues. And there's also a question about whether the Congress can work together to do something to address that number one issue of healthcare costs. I think both sides know that healthcare costs are too high, prescription drug costs are too high, and the issue really is whether the two can work together to do anything to actually take steps to reduce healthcare costs. We feel better about being able to avoid some of the outright attacks on these programs that we've seen over the last few years. But the question is, can we do anything to make progress on reducing costs?
Got it. Okay. It's going to be a challenge, that's for sure, and I bet it's going to be a multi-year battle, but hopefully we can at least play some good defense on this prescription drug stuff soon and then maybe get proactive in 2019. We're going to go back to the phones. Jackie from Mississippi had a comment and a question, and I want to remind folks as we're getting Jackie queued up, you can press *3 at any time to ask a question or make a comment or share an anecdote from Election Day wherever you are. So again, press *3 at any time. And Jackie, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just want to thank you for being able to be in the queue or get in, because I've been trying for some time. But I'd like to know, how can we be the difference in supporting the candidate in a runoff election? We only have like 2 to 3 weeks to prepare or get ready for a runoff in Mississippi. So I just don't see it happening. But the issues that matter and speak to our members, Medicaid expansion, that kind of thing, health care, with a lot of rural hospitals that have closed in Mississippi, we had a candidate speaking to that. So I'd like to know, in 2 to 3 weeks, if I know, I talked to some young people just going in stores, did you get to vote? Did you get to vote? They were at work. Some of them didn't. But how can we make a difference? And not just us as maybe members or seniors, how can we be the difference to get out there in the next 3 weeks to get this done in the sense of a runoff? We have a runoff in Mississippi.
Right. Hey, Sarah, I'm happy to take that.
Great. Go for it, Khelan. Thanks for that.
Great. That's a great question, and we've been working with our colleagues in the Mississippi State Office about some things that we can do to have the candidates talk about the issues, as well as making sure that we can get word to our members that there is a runoff, because I know runoffs tend to be low participatory affairs. So we're going to use our channels on social media. We're going to use our Convio email channel, and we're going to have an offline conversation with our Mississippi State Office on how best to do that, because I think that's a very important point, and it's a very good question. So thank you for that. And I would ask you as well to use your channels to get the word out, because we can do so much here from the national office. Our state office can do just so much from Jackson, but it's going to take you and your family and your friends and your community to be able to get the message out about the runoff that's going to be happening very, very soon.
Thanks, Khelan. And this question is going to go to David or Nancy, because you both have had years of experience on the Hill. And now that we'll have some new members of Congress coming, and there'll be obviously a different balance of power in 2019. But as we get new members of Congress, how do we build those relationships and get started introducing AARP's agenda to those folks as they're establishing themselves on the Hill? And again, David or Nancy, maybe talk about how our strategy out there in Washington, D.C., and then if there's things that volunteers can do across the country to help, please talk about that as well.
Sure. Well, we do it the old-fashioned way. We need to find opportunities to meet with each of the new members. We try to do that here in D.C., though I'll be honest, all of my experience during transitions is that members of Congress, when they're in D.C., are mostly trying to figure out if they've got office space and where their parking spot is and things like that. So immediately, I think we want to try to engage with them. First of all, congratulate them, both sides of the aisle. Talk with them a little bit about our agenda. Talk with them a little bit about our constituency back home. And then I think the important part of this is that we, working through our state offices, find time for our state staff and our volunteers to meet with the new members and the old members, to be honest, back home and make that introduction, make sure that it's not the first and the last time they see us, but really just use it as an opportunity to understand that we want to have a longer-term relationship. There were a lot of results. I mentioned earlier the big ACA battle a couple of years ago, the repeal and replace battle. There were a lot of lessons out of that, I think, for big national organizations. But I'll never forget one day we went up to the Hill to be kind of groups of us, about 100 organizations, and Chuck Schumer stood up in front of everybody and said, you know, you're all nice DC people, I love you all, but the only important groups are the ones that are able to mobilize their members, the people who are part of their organization back home, because what's important to members of Congress is to hear from the people who vote in their districts. And he was nice enough to applaud AARP and even made a little joke about all of our red T-shirts across the country. So I take that to heart. I believe our power and our coinage is in delivering the voice and the face of our members to members of Congress. And we're going to start right away. The important thing is once we've made these initial introductions, many of which we've made throughout the campaign, as Khelan pointed out, we've been working with candidates throughout the campaign season, and then to keep reinforcing that.
That's right. Khelan, or, well, really any of you, you know, similarly, we have governors across the country, and there's quite a few new ones. How is it a similar process, but states are in the lead, or how do we view building those relationships with some of those new folks in the governor's mansions?
Yeah, well, I'll start, and then Khelan's been talking to our states not only before the election, but a lot since then. One of the things we talked about a lot as we put the campaign together was the importance of kind of reaching out to all of the candidates, establishing relationships, and then looking toward being on transition teams or task forces that the newly elected will put in place. And I heard from 7 or 8 state directors yesterday, all of them mentioned plans they had to follow up on commitments that they had from candidates. All of this is key to our being able to show up where we need to and on the issues that are important. And you learn so much being on transition teams. You begin to see kind of how the newly elected thinks about issues, who he or she brings into the room, who's going to be important. We learn a lot in addition to having the opportunity to push our agenda. Khelan?
Just to add to what Nancy said, because I'm in 100% agreement, is one, we're going to congratulate them. We're going to work with them to shape their agendas, just like as Nancy mentioned, through transition teams and advisory councils and task forces and other methods. And then we're going to hold them accountable to the promises that they made. I mentioned before, 19 out of the 36 governor's races, we did video voters guides. Yeah. And the whole reason for that was not only to let our members know where the candidates stand, which is very important, but it's the ability for our state offices and our volunteers to be able to create or strengthen relationships with those candidates. So we can be at the table when we're helping craft those agendas for the next legislative sessions.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing. A number of our states, everybody did thinking about this, but a number of our states kind of were very interesting. They, for example, thought about the next 3 or 4 years wanting to have, for example, livable communities be on the agenda. And we're very deliberate about planting that with all of the candidates in the election cycle. Then to Khelan's point, in the video voter guides, ask the candidates about something like that. So it wasn't always just the top emerging, hot issue. It was often kind of thinking down the road a few years, where do we need to see these public officials provide some leadership?
Right.
And I would add that we're not just starting from scratch with all these officials. Some of them we've worked with in their current or prior capacity before this election. So we have some history at both the federal and state level with some of these members. So we already have some pre-established relationships. And I would note that for many of these newly elected members in Congress, many of them had commercials running that referenced AARP on some of the key issues running in their districts. So
absolutely.
That's right. We felt very relevant sometimes this cycle at times. No, those are all good points. And, for folks listening to the call who saw those video voter guides, we'd love to hear your reaction. I think state staff really felt like they were a great tool, but it was something we did more of this year than we ever have. And so if you had an idea about, or if you felt like that was a great tool to use, we'd love to hear that, or if you have ideas about other things we could do or ways to even improve the video voter guides. I know Khelan would be all ears on that too, because we always, after we get done with a big campaign like this, we do want to try to figure out what we can do better next time. And so any of your ideas about what worked or what didn't, you can press *3 at any time and share some of those ideas with us, because again, it's a time for some honest reflection about what worked and what didn't. So your ideas would be great. And again, you can just press *3 and to get in the queue to make a comment or share an idea. We are going to go back to the phones. We're going to go to Mary Ann in West Virginia. And Mary Ann, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have one suggestion for Jackie in Mississippi in answer to her question on how to get out the votes within the next 3 weeks before the runoff election.
Oh, great.
She already has talked with some people that did not get to vote for whatever reason, and I suggest that you adopt a campaign of each one, reach one. Get a cadre of AARP members and friends, neighbors, relatives, and ask each one of them to take at least one other person to the polls with them or to make them promise to get out and go vote in that runoff election. And that might help with the turnout. I don't know, but it's worth a shot as far as I'm concerned.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that.
I love that, Sarah. I love that.
By the way, any other ideas that come in, if they don't come in during the call, please send them in afterwards. And I just heard Khelan whisper that he and the campaigns team will pay for any really good ideas to get implemented. So
asking Andy for the money.
No, but we want all the good ideas, and we'll try things we haven't tried before, because we'll always learn more.
That's right. And so again, press *3 if you've got a great idea, and we'd love to hear it. But I also was struck, this cycle that there was a lot of it's kind of what's old is new again, because I know like up in Minnesota there was some postcard writing parties, and again, it's a lot of that one-on-one contact that I think was really effective, because I think maybe technology has taken over our lives too much, and there's some real power in the one-on-one and personal touch to some of this work. So thanks for sharing. Yes.
I still have, I have a win-win for us to comment on.
Great.
In West Virginia, we had a very hotly contested race for the Senate with our Senator Joe Manchin running against our Attorney General Patrick Morrisey. And one of the main issues in Senator Manchin's campaign, of course, was protecting the health insurance for those with pre-existing conditions. And our Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey, has joined in the lawsuit that would allow the insurance companies to deny coverage to those with pre-existing conditions or to kick them out. And we know that that would be very detrimental to our older senior citizens. And despite the fact that our president, Donald Trump, made 3 appearances at different times in West Virginia to campaign for Attorney General Morrisey, and Vice President Pence made 1, Senator Manchin did manage to prevail by a margin, it was close, I don't know, somewhere over 51, 52, I'm not good with numbers, to 46%, I believe, is what it was. So I consider that a success for West Virginia and for AARP, too, because while we're not politically taking a stance for either one candidate, we did manage to get the facts out about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of tight races across the country, and looking at folks who are going to advocate on behalf of our issues, and there's lots of different issues that we have champions on. So, but it's on the healthcare issue, making sure that we have folks across the country who are willing to listen, which I know is something Senator Manchin is always willing to have you all come in and talk about our concerns, and so that's good. But there were a lot of nail biters across the country, and as you said, we don't endorse any particular candidate or party, but we do want to keep an eye on folks and our issues because, as Khelan said, I think we're starting to be a little bit more aggressive isn't quite the right word, but a little bit more work on holding folks accountable and just making sure that people understand where folks were on key votes that we looked at over the last couple of years. David, looking ahead, so what do you see as opportunities for action on some of our priorities in 2019? So let's say we get everything done this year and we're successful, knock on wood, on all of those things you mentioned earlier. What do you think we're going to be spending our most time on in 2019?
I still think healthcare costs is going to rise really to the top of the list. So we have issues with trying to, stabilize the current healthcare marketplaces. We have issues potentially with any kind of lawsuits dealing with the ACA, and we certainly have prescription drug costs. Prescription drug costs is a particularly interesting one because it's one place where both the President and the House Democratic leadership have both said that this was a priority for them doing something about drug costs. The question again is going to be, can these parties work together? They're both obviously very divided right now, but they also do want to be able to get things done and show some achievements if they plan on, running again and trying to hold their offices. So we're going to be looking for opportunities, and prescription drugs is right at the top of the list, where both the President and the Democratic leadership have talked about doing some things to help hold down the cost of prescription drugs. We have lots of ideas, as we've had for years, about ways to do that, including giving Medicare negotiating authority, improving competition, getting generics to market quicker, preventing agreements that keep generics off the market, looking at international pricing and importation. So there's lots of ideas out there, and we have to see if we can find something that we can get the parties to work on and agree to. And I think that's going to be very high on our list.
Yeah, and President Trump has expressed some interest in working on the prescription drug issue. Nancy, what's been our discussion about working with the president on issues like prescription drugs, where we really are in agreement on the need to lower costs?
Yeah, we, as some of you may know, the Secretary of HHS has put out a number of proposals recently. And we are in touch with them, talking with them. I think there'll be action both at the executive branch level, the regulatory level, and also legislatively, as David said. We think that the stars have aligned a little bit in terms of the power structure in Washington. It used to be that people viewed pharma as incapable of being challenged or defeated, and we've had a couple of nice David versus Goliath. That's David generally, not David Certner specifically, going up against pharma. So I think, as David said, I think we have a real opportunity next year, not only to play some defense, which we'll have to, but also to work with the administration and work with the Congress, and not just the Democrats. I've had some preliminary conversations with some of the Republicans on the Senate side, and I think there will be an opportunity. We also, the big ticket items, I think are, as David said, I think are going to be health care. At the same time, we want to look for opportunities to work on all issues that are important for our members. So if there's an infrastructure bill, we know that there will be important provisions related to broadband and especially its impact in rural areas. If there is a transportation bill, we know that there'll be a focus on autonomous vehicles and lots of transportation pieces that affect our members. We want to engage on that. We are coming up again, I can't believe it happened so fast, but 2 years just slide by, where we have to renew the Older Americans Act. And so we'll be working on that. There are no shortage of issues. I guess what I ask of our volunteers is, you're always there for us, and we not only rely on it, we cherish it. And just know that we'll be asking for your help. And sometimes it'll be on big dramatic issues, and sometimes on issues that may not seem quite as major or as important, but we need your voice. We don't have a PAC, you know that. We don't give money. We don't play in that part of the political process. All of our strength, all of our power come from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Nancy, thinking of at the state level, I know caregiving and the work and save, kind of financial security are big priorities for us. What's your thought on states tackling those issues again next year?
Well, I think, Sarah, you might answer this question more knowledgeably than any of the rest of us. The states are at a point where they're looking at their agenda for next year. We wanted to wait till the election was over. We know that caregiving is going to be an important continuing area, as Khelan said, also what we call our Work and Save campaign, retirement security, utilities, again, part of utilities, broadband. I think we're going to rely on our states, as we have increasingly over the last few years, to identify those areas where they believe there may be some unique opportunities for us. So in Illinois, for example, over the last few years, we've worked a lot on getting the budget passed, and that was, front and center. Other places have kind of looked at homegrown kind of issues. My friends in New Jersey always have to spend a certain amount of time on property taxes. Those were the issues my parents worked on as volunteers for AARP in the 1960s. So we're going to rely on the states to also look and see what they need to work on that's top of mind with our members there.
Yeah, and as you said, the only thing I'd add, Nancy, as you said, I think agendas are going to be shaping up now that the election is over. And in some states, the change wasn't huge, but in some states, it really is. The election is going to really change the entire agenda in terms of what they're going to be talking about in 2019. So it is just an interesting time. And I think AARP, we're so lucky that we have that each state has the flexibility to really go tackle the issues that are of most important in that state, which is really it's pretty incredible to have the resources we have and the flexibility to do so. And I think our results speak for themselves, because most states have some pretty amazing successes for the 50+ each year, and I expect 2019 will be no different. And if folks on the call, we have a little bit of time left, not much though. But if you had a quick comment on what the big issue in your state might be in 2019, please press *3 to share that. And Nancy, one more question to you though. Even going down one click lower, AARP's gotten involved in local advocacy a little bit more than we have in the past. And again, not everywhere, because we certainly couldn't really have the, resources and staff and everybody else to be able to kind of engage in local advocacy everywhere. But talk a little bit about why we're engaging sometimes in some of those local advocacy issues.
Well, over the last 10, 15 years, we've really grown our footprint in community, and it's important for us. It's where our members are most focused, where they are delighted to see us. And through our Livable Communities work, we're now in 330 communities across the country, working on a variety of things. In many places, we're doing walk audits, working in parks, things like that. But in a few places, we've worked on local bond initiatives, a couple of transportation bond initiatives, things that were important to improve the quality of the community. And I think it gives us tremendous opportunity to be relevant to our members right where they live. One thing I was going to mention is, I had the chance to meet with our entire campaigns team. They had a retreat here last week. And I was reflecting on 7 years ago, we had a situation where every time we did a campaign, whether it was at the federal level or the state level, we recreated the apparatus. We kind of went and grabbed people and said, okay, we're going to do this campaign, you do this, you do that. And it just didn't make sense. What we wanted to do was build something that could support campaigns, whether it's our social media, grassroots, grass tops, telephones, whatever. And as we grew that, we grew the opportunity for multi-state campaigns. Our first one was utilities, then Medicaid, caregiving, work and save. And multi-state campaigns are exactly what they sound like. We do an issue across a number of states and can kind of support that activity from here. Then we started to do single state campaigns, because states, as much as they love the multi-issue ones, realized that there were issues that they needed to work on uniquely in their states. And now we've added to that our work at the local level. So think of it as kind of the logical extension of what we need to do to provide the kind of support people over the age of 50 need.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thanks for that, Nancy. Well, we are going to wrap up in about 5 minutes, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for each of you to make some closing comments and maybe one more question. So, Khelan, reflecting back on Be the Difference vote, what's your quick take on what was maybe a surprising success this year, and then maybe one thing we're going to maybe modify a little bit for the next time around?
Great question. I don't know if it was surprising. I do know. I did think that we were going to have a higher turnout election this year, and I did know that the 50 plus would make the majority or the decisive part of the voting block this year, and both things were true. Now we're still waiting on data to drill down on some key races and states, but I was very heartened to see how many people came out to vote. It's very heartened to see that our issues got a lot of attention, including healthcare that David referenced earlier. And I want to thank all the volunteers who played a huge part in that.
That's right. And anything when we think about 2 years, even next year, because we know we're going to have some states involved in voter engagement next year, is there something you're really looking to make even better the next time around?
I think there's 3 governor's races for sure. There's Mississippi, and we talked about that before. There's Louisiana and there's Kentucky, where I think we're going to take some of the lessons that we learned from this year with the 36 governor's races that we engaged in to be able to help fine-tune a lot of our tactics and our approaches going into the 2020 presidential election, which will also have about 12 governor's races that year, including West Virginia. But Nancy mentioned, there's going to be so many mayoral races, and I think this is a place for us to really make a difference because mayoral races tend to be lower voter turnout affairs, but they're incredibly important because these mayors help decide issues like livable communities, housing, affordable housing, transportation, you name it, and various other issues. And if we can help get our members to the polls, we can help have more political power with some of these localities. And so I'm really looking forward to getting more involved in those next year.
That's a great point. You don't need that many red shirts to make an impact at a mayoral function. That's good. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for your leadership this year, Khelan. It really was an amazing effort. And thanks for being on the call today. So, David, looking ahead, what are your final comments? And is there an issue in particular that you think we all need to? And my guess is it's healthcare. Is there a piece of healthcare that you really think we all need to bone up a little bit and be ready to engage pretty heavily, both at the state and federal level for next year? And any final thoughts from you, David?
Sure. Well, let me start with the final thoughts, which is, we still have a very divided country. Those divisions don't seem to be going away. If anything, they seem to be getting deeper. And now we have divided government to go along with it. There are big splits in this country between, for example, the rural areas and the urban areas. There's big splits among gender. There's big splits among race. So we have a lot of division in the country. And the Congress, after this election, I think actually got more partisan, not less partisan. So that'll be the context we're dealing with, which means you'll see the Senate, where they have more control, for example, over things like nominations, spending a lot more time on doing nominations. And the House, having to deal with 2 other branches that are Republican control, will probably be spending a lot of time on oversight of the administration. And so that is a context, again, that leads to more division, not working together. But we will still need to look for the opportunities to work on things we think can get done. We've obviously talked about prescription drugs and healthcare costs as things that are obviously top of mind for the voters, and therefore they're going to be top of mind for people in Congress. But we're going to also look for opportunities in other places where we might be able to get some common ground and may have less partisanship. Things like some pension changes to increase pension security. We'll certainly need to work on budget issues, so that means funding for programs that serve older Americans. We may be able to work on things like improving the age discrimination laws. So we will be looking at all opportunities in all of these areas to see where we can make progress and to see if there's opportunities to get things done on a bipartisan level. Because one thing we know for sure, nothing is going to be able to get through without bipartisan support.
Great. And a question did come in, and I'm going to, just to kind of keep us moving, I'm going to just share it. And it was Judy in Kansas, and I think that's Judy, our new state president in Kansas. So, Judy, thanks for your leadership and for stepping up to be our new state president. But Judy asked, do we believe there's going to be any bills affecting Social Security or Medicare next Congress? And David or Nancy, you want to take a shot at answering that?
Well, I think given the divided government, we're not going to see a whole lot of bills to ratchet back or cut benefits. But on the flip side, we may see more bills to, for example, expand benefits. Expand Social Security benefits, do more for prescription drugs, maybe make improvements to the Medicare program. For example, you'll certainly hear a lot about, although it won't go anywhere, but you'll hear a lot of phrases thrown around like Medicare for all or Medicare buy-in. So I think some of these kinds of issues will be on the table next year. I don't know that any of them will be able to go anywhere in a divided Congress, but there may be a lot of talk about them.
Got it. Thanks for that. All right, Nancy, and any final thoughts from you for today, just on pondering the election and our work ahead?
Sure. Well, first off, David mentioned the divided country. In all of our polls this year, the single most important thing to our members was how divided the country is and how they wish that weren't the case. And I think that's important for us to understand as we represent their interests, that we need to convey how important it is that we bring people together and that we bring both sides of the aisle together when we do our work. So I think that's something we want to all keep close to us along the way. And then a couple of just additional observations to what we've said already. Khelan said, and it's true, we're very proud of the work we've done to turn out and increase the profile of the older voter. What also makes me very proud is we seem to have done this without generating a nasty debate about intergenerational warfare. And I think that's really important. And what I always said, I know Khelan and others did, was we want older voters to go to the polls, and we want everyone to go to the polls. And this is important for the country, and we want to see all of those participation numbers go up, and I think we did. We'll have more data in the coming weeks. One part of the campaign we didn't mention explicitly, but I know you all know, is that this was the most extensive multicultural campaign we've ever done. We had a lot of activity in particularly the Hispanic Latino community, African American Black, and have learned a lot from that. And I think you're going to be able to see that in the work we do ahead. But that was an important step for us. I have two sets of thank yous as I conclude. The first is probably the most obvious, which is to all of you. We can't do it without you. You got to stick with us. Find a friend to kind of join in the volunteer ranks and let us know what we need to do to be an even more attractive volunteer opportunity to people than we are today. Because we know that you all have a lot of organizations you can be helping every single day, and we want you helping us. So I want to thank you for that. The other thing is I want to mention to all of you who are volunteers, I think you all connect with somebody in the great world of AARP in person and online. But those of you who work especially in advocacy have the gift of working with an extraordinary set of staff at the national level and at the state level. We are blessed as an organization. It is absolutely true. We have resources other organizations would kill for. We have extraordinary communications channels. We have the ability to move on the dime, to be able to do teletown halls, to be able to do mail, to be able to do emails, and that's all great, but none of that works if it weren't for the kind of talent we have here at National supporting all of these efforts and across the country in our state offices. So I try to thank them occasionally, but not too often, or they all get a big head and, are difficult to deal with. But want to thank them all for what they do, but especially if you have a chance, we pride ourselves on being able to thank the volunteers. And I'm always touched when I hear from volunteers talking about how great the staff are that they deal with. And together, we are making really good things happen. And again, as David said, there are no shortage of tough issues for us to work on together. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for everything, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Nancy, and that was well said. And I do know, Nancy, as our fearless leader way at the top, she does really value input and ideas from everybody. And so for anybody out on the call who has an idea that comes to you later today that you wanted to share about either our advocacy work ahead or the voter engagement campaign that we just completed, really you can share those through your state office. You can share them directly with Nancy. You can share them through the portal. So, but again, Nancy is probably a leader who wants to always hear the feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so please, if you've got an idea out there or a comment or a suggestion, please do find a way to share it. And I want to, and again, thanks to David, Nancy, and Khelan for being with us today and everybody on the call. The next telephone town hall is going to be on Thursday, November 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We hope you'll continue to join these calls that are designed to help you keep you connected to our leaders at AARP and what's going on. If you have topics that you'd like addressed on one of our upcoming calls, you can just email your suggestion to volunteer@aarp.org. And finally, a recording of this telephone town hall will be posted on the volunteer portal. You just click on the Libraries tab and enter the letters TTH in the search box. Again, Volunteer Portal, click on the Libraries tab and enter the letters TTH in the search box. And as always, if you need any help accessing or using the Volunteer Portal, please call our volunteer helpline during normal business hours at 866-740-7719. So that's it. Thanks again for giving us your time this afternoon and for all you do every day out in your community. And we will talk to you in a couple weeks. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks, and bye-bye.